Hi, friends. Hi, colleagues. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Christina, and I will be moderating today's discussion, which is dedicated to rethinking peace building in the South Caucasus in relation to the war in Ukraine. While the recent years have been a period of constant reflection and rethinking for us, our team, the Caucasus Edition's editorial team, as well as our network of different cross-border initiatives and people involved in this work. First of all, the Second Karabakh War that created a humanitarian crisis and deepened the grievances and distrust within our societies towards each other. It has also created a major existential crisis within the peace building community locally and internationally. And that required major reconsideration of peace building methods and goals and the work in general. And now the war in Ukraine is changing our understanding of conflicts in the region, in the post-Soviet space and beyond. This is of course, majorly understood and analyzed and seen as a confrontation of Russia and the West. And in that narrative, it seems like we in the South Caucasus are just observing that tragic events. But I believe it is, and we believe that it is also important to understand that these developments are directly influencing the South Caucasus and the conflicts in our region. So it is again important for us to step back and to reflect, analyze the situation, the new reality, and understand the future for peace building in this context. This should have been an editorial discussion, an internal meeting for us, but we decided to make it a public reflection and invite you to join us and be part of this discussion and rethinking and redesigning, re-strategizing peace building in the South Caucasus. So thank you for joining us today. Let me quickly describe the format for today's discussion, because it will be slightly different from what we usually have during our webinars. We as a team have identified several questions that we would like to address. And there I will invite my colleagues, Gamaghelyan, Sevil Huseynova, and Vadim Romashov to share their analysis and reflections about these topics and questions. And here we also have included some of the questions that we received during registration. For example, one was about the role of the donor community and what should be prioritized in the future, short term and long term. So we'll certainly address that. And by the way, there was also a question regarding why we don't have Georgian colleagues or experts in our panel. And I want to mention that we do plan at least one more webinar about this topic. So, and we also have that in mind, and we will certainly also invite colleagues from Georgia to join the panel next time. So yeah, and after addressing that questions that we have in mind now, then we will open the floor for the audience to join the discussion. And there you have two options. One is the traditional one. Please feel free to submit questions and comments in the Q&A section. But we also, in order to make it more interactive and to have this discussion with you, we also consider to, if you would be willing to join the panel, to allow you to also share your thoughts in person by unmuting yourself. And of course, also turning on the camera if you would like to. Actually, it works. Technically, you will have to raise a hand, and then I will, as I'm the host of the webinar, I will unmute you, and also we can turn on your video upon request. And in order to because we want to try, and this is an experiment for us all, make this webinar interactive, I should ask all of you, the audience members and my colleagues, the panelists, to keep your comments short and on point, so we can hear as many opinions and reflections the time allows, yeah, to kind of keep the discussion dynamic. And of course, I trust you all, but as a moderator of this webinar, I should also ask you to reflect in our discussions respectfully, because well, all topics that we discuss during our webinars are sensitive, and this one is no exception. So I'm certain there might be disagreements on different points, and yeah, let's just agree to disagree and be respectful towards each other during the process. So yeah, well, and the first question that I want to ask my colleagues to address, and the starting point is, what is the impact of the war in Ukraine on the South Caucasus and peace building in our region? Yeah.
Thank you. So as we agreed that I'll start. Thank you, Christina, very much for starting us off. The question, of course, of the impact of Ukraine, the war in Ukraine on South Caucasus is multidimensional. We can talk about the economic impact. We can talk about the political impact. We're seeing a mass migration of Russians and Ukrainians to the region. So we can have really many discussions here, way more than one, and we probably should, as you said, in the future. But given the time constraints and the main focus of Caucasus Edition on conflicts, I'll focus on the impact on Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict in general, and Karabakh conflict in particular. So we are seeing here a quite seismic, in my view, shift in understanding of what conflicts are. In 1990s, we've seen this period of triumph of liberal democracies, at least that was the perception, and that was understood that from that point on, international wars are somewhat of an issue of the past. It was famously framed as New Wars by Marie Kaldor, probably pretty famous book, that the new wars are all intrastate. They are primarily about state-minority relations. And even the wars that had international dimension, such as Karabakh one, from the international law perspective, were seen as a war within a country, in that case, as an internationally recognized UN member country. In that case, Azerbaijan, having a conflict with the minorities, and the outside actors, in this case Armenia, were supporting the minority rights, and potentially also rights for self-determination. Similar things we've seen in Georgia and many other countries, where, again, from international norms perspective, it was internationally recognized state, and we were protecting minority rights, potentially being persecuted within that state. So we had massacres in this period. We had this mass displacement, but all of this was seen as an outlier, as a big problem for the world itself. Every displacement, every mass atrocity was seen something that the world has to address through instruments of human rights in general, minority rights specifically. So within the framework of liberal democracy. So that's been, again, the solution to Karabakh for a long time has been seen, from a perspective of rights of the population. That's been changing. That's changed with the Iraq war first, and then second with Ukraine, especially the war in the eastern Ukraine, and now more directly with the assault of Russia on Kiev, where essentially a sovereign nation, a UN member state, Iraq first, now Ukraine, are seen as a target of one great power or the other. And that brings us back to very different kind of wars, essentially wars that preceded the new wars, where all the smaller states, post-colonial states, become a legitimate target of kind of great power politics and proxy wars. And great power rivalries, also targets of direct invasion of great power. What does it mean for Karabakh? I think a lot. So it might look as if it's the same continuation of the same war of 90s, and in many respects it is. But what's possible and what's not, I think is changing tremendously. It's not an accident that Azerbaijan stopped in 2020 at the border of Armenia, because that was not seen as a legitimate target. I'm not sure that will be the case if we continue in this trajectory. The displacement of mass displacement of Armenians, even if it happened, it was not seen as a legitimate target. It was about the rights of the Armenian population of Karabakh all along. And now more and more you are hearing rumors about why not solve this problem through just letting all the Armenians, just 100,000 of them, leave the country. So essentially, all these norms and the solutions seen within the realm of international law have been out of window, are moving out of window. A quick last point here is that any war now, any conflict in a post-Soviet space opens up then a possibility of turning that region that has an open conflict into an area of proxy war. And I think that puts a tremendous responsibility, I would say, on leaders on Armenia and Azerbaijan solve their conflict as soon as possible. Because yes, in the short term, one or the other, probably Azerbaijan, first of all, could benefit from another round of war. But in the longer term, none of us are going to benefit because, again, simply looking at what's happening in much bigger country, Ukraine, we are simply likely to become an area of proxy war. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil, for your input. I start from recalling the events of 2015, 2014, 2015, when the annexation of Crimea and military action in eastern Ukraine dramatically reduced interest in the South Caucasus conflict. At that time, international experts and staff from various international foundations and organizations made no secret of the fact that the scale of the confrontations, that is the size of the territory where the conflict is developing, and the size of the population mattered. In fact, this was the moment when we were told that our frozen conflicts could wait, and the size of your disaster was nothing compared to what was happening in Ukraine. Ukraine's proximity to the EU borders also mattered. To sum up, I would say that the concept of dividing conflicts into more important and less important is a mistake. I would suggest that now, again, all interest will be directed towards Ukraine. The South Caucasus, with its conflicts, will again find itself in the shadow of a bigger, more important and more relevant conflict for the EU. This doesn't mean that there will no longer be any support for peace building in the South Caucasus, but a decline in interest and a change in priorities is likely to have an overall negative impact. Also, it would be extremely naive to expect any breakthrough in Ukraine to find new methods, approach to peace building. And considering the scale of the disaster and the nature of the war, the Russia-Ukraine peace building would be, at the very least, very difficult and have little prospect of success. If our large neighbors' experience of post-war peace building is very negative, it will have a negative impact on us as well. And it's not only peace activists who support each other transnationally. Revanchists, far-right nationalists, militarization supporters are also support each other. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Sevil. Thank you, Philip. I have not that much to add to this inputs. I just maybe would start what Phil has mentioned. So indeed, there was a change in the paradigm of what is happening in the post-Soviet space in terms of peace and conflicts and new developments. But at the same time, what I believe we see is rather a reflection of the neo-imperialist wars that were so typical in the late 90s and beginning of 20th century, when the shrinking economic basis for elites, economic elites, and also those elites in power in the countries in the region, but also globally, lead them to certain actions which definitely can be considered aggressive, expansionist, and chauvinist in many ways, because this is how basically the new markets, the new resources are searched to support the economic basis of these elites. In addition to all those political nationalistic narratives which are surrounding this economic basis of such aggressive moves of political elites. And but particularly in the case of post-Soviet conflicts, first of all, we should really consider the justification of the Russian invasion that happened in Ukraine, provided by the political government of Russia, because it was based mostly on the situation of unresolved conflict in the eastern Ukraine. So this was the main pretext, rather like departing from all these chauvinist explanations about how Ukraine was created and all these things, but focusing specifically on the frozen conflict in the eastern Ukraine, or like those which was not really frozen, but at least the territorial conflict which was not resolved. And the post-Soviet space has many these kind of points of tensions, and including the South Caucasus and particularly the Karabakh issue. And I believe that this change of paradigm happened not only a month ago, but we should also consider the second Karabakh war as part of that, because we clearly see the increased presence of international actors with the imperialist ambitions also in this region, and their huge role in the developments of the warfare on the ground, but also the negotiation process and how they changed completely the rules of games that were present before the Second Karabakh War. So apparently there is a certain trend which may continue as long as these territorial conflicts are present in the region, because these are those areas where the let's put it this way, expansionist power of certain governments and neo-imperialist policies can certainly justify their actions and basically continue escalating the conflicts in the region, taking upon these critical points of tension. Thank you.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing, and thank you for describing the context, the regionalization of conflict, and the risk of turning into proxy wars, and the rise of far-right sentiments, and the rest that you've described. So in this context, that how can we reconceptualize peace building, especially in the context of the South Caucasus?
You should call on us. Who do you want to start?
Yeah, Phil, would you like to start?
I started last one, but okay. Sure. So how to reconceptualize peace building? Oh, again, not an easy question, but the peace building, given everything we were discussing in the previous point, the peace building until, well, since the wars were seen mostly local and to be supported by, at least normatively, that was how it was understood, that these are mostly local wars and they are kind of in a time when international borders and so on are not going to be touched. The solutions that can come through establishment of liberal democracy and minority rights, people's rights for self-determination, all kind of international norms. So then the solutions were again pushed through instruments such as transitional justice, civil societies, establishment and institutionalization of civil societies that would bring new kind of channels for constructive management of conflict. There has been very little attention paid in conflict studies field, at least to international wars recently, than to wars of conquest, to neo-imperialism, colonialism, and what else. So it's very little really that in recent literature on practice of conflict resolution has to say about how to approach what we are seeing and witnessing now, which is very unfortunate. And yet we have any continuation, as Sevil was mentioning too, anything that happens here following in the war in Russia in Russia and Ukraine, it's quite disastrous for obviously Russia and Ukraine, but also all the neighborhood. Should Russia be able to conquer Ukraine in some form, essentially, probably will not stop there, can probably turn to very likely to Georgia, Moldova, Armenia, similar to Belarus now, will very likely become a plus-darm for invasion into Georgia. That's one nightmare scenario from where I'm sitting. Another one, Russia's this drug zone, and Russia gets weakened. And then that opens up all kind of possibilities for wars still in the region. In this case, South Caucasus, where whether Azerbaijan can become more aggressive towards Armenia or Turkey or Iran or some other actors, or even the US might decide to destabilize the region to further drag Russia into new fronts. So there are too many possibilities, essentially, of the very serious destabilization of the region. What does it mean for peace building? I think what we had is technocratic solutions of short fundings given to primarily international NGOs to come in and do small projects. So that approach will not have much of an effect given the changes we are seeing. So I'm hoping to see two developments here. On the state-to-state level, since smaller post-colonial states, I'm very much will be advocating to see the perils of engaging in conflicts, continuous conflicts with each other, and necessity of, if not even solving, because it might not be possible, even the new proxy wars era we are entering, at least not escalating vis-a-vis each other, not making it easy to play them against each other. When it comes to civil society, so people like ourselves, again, I don't see short technocratic solutions trainings here and there necessarily doing much good. But thinking about longer-term peace movement, I think it becomes, and transnational necessarily peace movement becomes important. And an example I have is I started looking into World War II literature and German resistance, and essentially, as unfortunate as all this sounds, I think we are in a pretty long-term war here. And trying to prevent as many regions as possible from falling prey, falling a victim of this expanding war. But sooner or later we will come out of this war, and what next, right? And we had major wars in the past that the aftermath was even more disastrous, and we had wars in the past where the aftermath was somewhat of a peace. World War II is a good example of a disastrous war, yet that was followed by decades of relative stability. And I don't think it's an accident. It was very much planned by transnational peace movement, including Germans' resistance during World War II. Right? So this vision for a very alternative future that's not going to repeat all the mistakes that were done following World War I, that would not be repeated. So I see a very big need to this major rethinking of the world order moving forward. And I think here, academia and civil society have a major work to do in really planning and putting a vision and strategy forward. Thank you. Sevil, I'll call on you.
Okay, thank you, Phil. I would still like to remain on a more optimistic stance. I believe that responsible governments with the resources to start World War III will still have the pragmatism not to take too rash a step. But the very fact that 30 years after the end of the Cold War, we are again talking about the possibility of a nuclear war cannot but cause great apprehension. And I agree with Phil that we have so far learned very little from the European post-war experience. And coming back to the question how we can reconceptualize peace building in the South Caucasus, What's important in my mind is that it's at the very that we have very few well-known public intellectuals involved in the peace movement. There are few public and famous people in general. We need more bright people, bright names, people who have access to the public field, to a large audience, people whose position is difficult to marginalize. This is what we miss, and for different reasons, including the reason that I couldn't even name such names, honestly speaking. So we need to create the conditions for such names to emerge. We need to seriously work on access to the public field, create new radio, TV, support bloggers, musicians, artists, anyone who can help to involve as many people as possible in the peace movement. The movement itself does not exist as such and needs to be created at first. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, I think we naively thought that all people knew what peace was and wanted peace. But did they? In the Soviet years, the slogans "Miru mir," peace to peace, were accompanied by slogans glorifying heroism in war. It was a militaristic society. Since the collapse of the Soviet Union, there have been many conflicts and wars are taking on an increasingly large scale. And we see in Azerbaijan and Armenia, now in Russia, there was and is a quite massive support for the war. Ukraine, by any large, has also turned out to be much better prepared for war than all the experts before expect before it started. But now one is ready for peace as an understanding of what is a complex system of compromises. Do they teach in our schools what peace is? How to achieve and maintain it? Unfortunately not. What our schools teach is militaristic patriotism. The idea of peace needs popular representation and educational programs. We need to educate adherents of peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Sevil. Thank you, Philip. I would rather also continue from contemplating about the situation after the Second World War, architecture of security and peace movements, and also comparing it to the contemporary. So apparently, those examples that Philip provided on the peace movement in the during the preceding the Second World War and then and aftermath of the Second World War, like the first wave of peace movement that we can consider in the beginning of 19th century, especially after the First World War and during the First World War, but specifically those who were fighting with concrete political regimes, like anti-fascist movements in Germany, are famous for contributing a lot to the rise of peace movement globally. Of course, unsuccessfully, as the history showed at that time. But at least after the Second World War, exactly the threat of the nuclear war and all how devastating the contemporary weapons are, led a lot of people to advocate for peace, for the global peace, regardless of ideological divisions, and trying to find some sorts of in common, which was exactly the avoidance of the global war, the avoidance of the Third World War, and using the nuclear power against each other. But what we witnessed afterwards, with the end of so-called Cold War, we witnessed the creation of new architecture of international peace building, which became very technocratic, very formalized. Indeed, it has its focus on liberal human rights, and this was, I believe, was the biggest contribution to the rise of authentic civil society activists across the countries in the region, in the post-Soviet space, but also globally. But the hegemony of liberal peace over the last 3 decades showed that the issues of social injustice, environmental degradation, and many other issues related to that, and the security as such, human security, have not been resolved. And all those civil society activists, authentic civil society activists, they are now searching for certain alternatives to the provided liberal world order and liberal peace, especially with its focus on not only human rights, but more than that, focus on consumerism, free market, economicism, and many other aspects of global capitalist economic model. And the contemporary international and regional security architecture does not address these issues, which are also pregnant with the expansion of neo-imperialist aggression in the region. And this bias, it has a certain bias towards state actors and economic elites when the decisions are made at the level of international politics. In fact, what we see that the civil society is put aside from real decision making in the international level and the international policies concerning especially global and regional peace, global and regional securities. I believe that the best response to the war in Ukraine on the side of international peace building could be the support of the rise of global civil society promoting a change in the global political and economic system. This requires collective learning processes, collective actions towards a more global reform that is led by transnational peace movement, and this peace movement should not be formalized or NGOized form of activity, but rather a network of different peace movements across countries and regions that exactly would be tasked not only promoting anti-war discourses, but also promoting the global reform in politics and economics that would reduce power maximizing and capitalist approaches of the political regimes in the countries and also globally. And I believe this is important also to think and consider how this peace movement can be launched as one of those regional peace movements that will be part of a global transnational peace movement in the South Caucasus and in the post-Soviet space in general. And unfortunately, but at the same time, the only good effect of the war in Ukraine that I can observe, and I think many of you may concur with me, that there is a rise of anti-war discourses across the space, across the region, across the Europe, which we have never seen before. And this is important for us to take this into consideration and take upon this wave of anti-war discourses in order to lead it to authentic network of peace movements across the continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I also want to acknowledge, thank you guys for keeping it concise, your comments on these questions. And also I want to mention that I'm seeing the questions already submitted in the Q&A and also raised hands. Let us probably finish this round of reflection around the questions that we have in our agenda, and then we will definitely make sure to address as many questions as you have. Three of you mentioned the importance of kind of consolidating and peace movement, a transnational regional movement. But you all also have mentioned that it is weak at this point. Of course, there are some tendencies after the Second Karabakh War and now because of due to the war, unfortunate war in Ukraine. So what could be, and of course you also mentioned about less institutionalization, and so having an authentic movement, but at this moment, most of peace building activities are done by NGOs and kind of that have certain more or less institutionalized form. So considering all of that, what are the immediate steps that you have in mind that we could think of, also us as a team and other actors similar to us in the peace building community?
Let me start. What can we what can be and should be done right now? I think that we need involve young people who came out of anti-war positions during the Second Karabakh War in the peace movement. Together we should try to rethink the reasons why peace building in the South Caucasus has been so weak and ineffective. Participants from Russia should have been involved a long time ago. We all always said that Russia was a party to the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, Abkhazia, and South Ossetia. But as a rule, no participants from Russia were invited into projects. There was also the problem of finding schemes. Yeah? It was often a purely bureaucratic problem. We have to change this bureaucracy. And we should not forget also about Belarus. This country also happened to be a participant of the war, of today's war. And this is a case where at the political level, there is a support for the war, but at the level of the population, there is a latent, so even hidden protest against the war. It is an interesting experience, very atypical, it seems to me, for the post-Soviet space. And it should be also studied. The participation of Belarus activists in peace-building networks and movements seems to me very important and relevant for today. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I think I will continue then. Staying on the same page with what I mentioned, answer to the Christina's question before. I believe that anti-war discourses indeed are now spreading on its own and related to the concrete war in Ukraine, and this is a usual problem of anti-war movement. I think there is a well-known phrase by Mother Teresa when she mentioned that, to put it in my own words, that don't call me for anti-war movement, but call me when the peace movement will be launched. And I think this is important to consider. So what we observe now is the anti-war discourses related to the concrete war. When this war will be stopped, hopefully it will be stopped as soon as possible. There is a chance, or there is a possibility that also the anti-war movement that arose on its own in Europe, so not only in the post-Soviet space, but I would say even in the whole Europe, or maybe even globally to some extent, would also diminish on its own, or vanish away. And I'm afraid that this is the time then for us, those who have at least certain access to international fundings, to more or less formalized and organized peace building that have existed for the last 3 decades. So this is the time for us to not let these anti-war discourses to fade away, to transform them into real peace movement. undermining the propagandist machinery calling for violence, discrimination, and war in the region and also beyond that. So for that purposes, in addition to only like spreading only anti-war discourses is not enough. It is important that people would be involved in pacifist, pro-peace, but also any kind of anti-war activities locally, but also in the places of their work, for example, of their studies, so organizationally as well. So peace is happening not only between the states, between the countries, and across those conflict divides, presumed conflict divides that we usually focus on, but this activity, peace activity, activities for peace, activities against violence is happening in our daily lives as well, and there is a huge room for this, so that we can transform this anti-war movement into real pacifist or pro-peace movement in the region. For these purposes, it is important to create platforms, create rooms for people who are active locally in their organizations to share the experiences of their self-organization, to unite their efforts in the joint struggle for peace and against any kind of wars. So not only, of course, the war in Ukraine, which is now the most affecting people in the region, but also considering the possibility of the future wars in the region. So of course, this is, I believe, could be a program minimum, but program maximum, of course, is like continue supporting opposition to war, continuing supporting political movement for change towards social justice, towards peace, increasing the awareness that the nationalism, the nation states is a historically obsolete political structure that prevents peaceful cooperation among the nations, among the peoples. So this also requires certain type of education to be introduced in schools, in organizations, and just in any kind of networks and organizations which are not related to even education. But as such, these discourses of peace and anti-violence must be spread across different channels. And so it is important not only to study peace, of course, but also to act towards peace, to act towards changing the world for the place where people with differences would live together. Thank you.
Thank you. A couple of words to add from me. It's, there has been a critique of liberal peace, and it might have been seen as abstractized peace, the NGOization of activism. But I think this recent couple of years showed in very practical terms, where the challenge with that kind of peace building was, and we were very much part of it. So as an institution in the South Caucasus for many years working on peace building, the challenge was that once the war hit, in the Second Karabakh war specifically, we saw that almost the entire peace building field, institutionalized one, fell apart. Almost no NGO really, actually no NGO, I would say, stood out pro-peace or anti-war. And even those who were involved for years in doing this work in NGOs just disappeared in one day, right? So, and then vice versa. On the flip side, you've seen what Vadim is mentioning and Sevil was mentioning, anti-war, or at least anti-war, if not pro-peace yet, voices very actively coming out of Russia, a place where probably there was no peace building done in institutional sense, or very little of it in the same way it was done in the Armenian, Azerbaijan, Karabakh context. And so that does show something, right? That there have been these years of this discussion of supporting the voices that are there, as opposed to trying to kind of build peace, institutionalized peace, is very important. Again, because there are these NGOs. Why I think that happened? Two reasons. One, this critique of the top-down imposed, this is the approach you should adopt, this is the training you do and then replicate. That worked for the training itself. It didn't necessarily translate into any kind of anybody buying into these ideas. So that much more ground up once the peace movement is there, the ideas are there, anti-war resistance is there now in Russia, supporting that could have much more impact than trying to bring the ideas down. And the second piece for me, I think, is that, so one is that you need to support the authentic voices as opposed to trying to impose. But second point is it was very fragmented. For, as Sevil mentioned, very Russians in all these years of peace building. The way the fundings were distributed, it was, this is Armenia funding, this is Azerbaijan funding. Don't bring anybody who is not Armenian, Azerbaijan citizen, right, into the conversation. This is Karabakh funding, this is like South Ossetia funding. These two things should stay separate. So all of that also didn't allow us to anyhow connect the dots and see how all these conflicts and all the relationships in kind of post-Soviet space were very much mutually reinforcing dynamics. So that's two things that need to change, I believe, to move forward. So one is we need to start supporting those authentic voices that stood anti-war during the war. As opposed to those who are paid to do the work. And two, they should be looked much more regionally into what's happening. But also three, we need to be much more intentional about actually reacting to the day while keeping the big picture in mind. Reacting to the day, meaning right now we have massive humanitarian crisis. We have displacement, obviously, out of Russia and Ukraine. They're also having a very slow displacement out of, again, a new one, out of Karabakh. That is practically not part of a conversation. And we will be seeing, again, marginalization of the voices of those who are displaced. And somebody else, some technocratic NGOs will be speaking on their behalf. So where are the voices of Karabakh Armenians, of Ukrainians displaced, and Russians who are actually displaced because of the war? So really integrating these voices into the conversation, I believe, is extremely important. And as Vadim said, those of us who have some institutions to create platforms, we should start channeling these voices as opposed to only pushing our own, which critique to ourselves in the first place.
Thank you. Well, and the final question that let's quickly address, and then we have many comments and questions, and let's move to that. Well, one question that was submitted during registration, so we had that in advance and we incorporated in our agenda, is actually about the donor community, and you already mentioned some limitations that were there, and the question is about the focus. What should be the focus for peace building, for the donor community in relation to peace building in the upcoming years, in short-term and long-term timeframes? What do you think?
I see I'm written the first to answer. So I'll already said some of this in the previous point, but to kind of summarize in a way. So one is definitely start searching and supporting the local voices that are speaking up against war and pro-peace as the war happens. Again, that's really, these are the voices that need to be prioritized in terms of support because they're also the most targeted ones. Two, it's start looking into funding kind of outside of this very short 1 year, 2 year kind of very piecemeal. This is yours, this is yours. Yeah, these are the two different conflicts. This is what you focus on. This is what you don't waste. And kind of look into this more strategically and long term, and take risks with non-traditional, non-institutional actors. And yes, there will be a loss of a few $1,000s here and there, but that's a risk that I think worth taking for the donor community, which again, so far prioritized who is going to be doing better reporting as opposed to who is able to really produce a new discourse, and a discourse that will lead us towards peace. Three is plan for long-term support for the displacement. The displacement will be continuing, and those displaced are two categories of people. One who are bombed and need humanitarian support, and we see this and we support them right now, and hopefully that will stay there because at some point the conflict becomes old in news and the support fades away. So that's one type of support. There's a second type of support that's needed, which is there's a lot of people are leaving, again, particularly out of Russia right now, right, in the past from Azerbaijan and other places, who are speaking out against war, who are speaking out for alternative future, and then are persecuted in their own societies, and they have to leave. And yes, these are usually educated people who can go and find some work somewhere and define themselves, but they disappear as an actor. They disappear as a voice who can then help us bring change. So really creating or supporting spaces where these voices coalesce and try to articulate this alternative future for their society and by extension for the region and the world. I think that is extremely important as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I totally agree with Phil about the long-lasting programs and projects. We're reflecting about some projects which were long-lasting and they were effective, and some very let's say not logistical, but some organizational points for donors. It's also I touch upon about bureaucracy, yeah? And it's the various bureaucratic procedures. It's about the reporting process, yeah, which is take a lot of time. And this is also a very important part of the problem, yeah, to reduce bureaucratical work for those who are working in this field. Yeah, and also for donors, and it will be like a self-critics, I would say that donors should pay attention to the participants of the project. I think that, and the question was raised in the chat box about the other participants, not Russian, Ukrainian, but other participants from the South Caucasus, and Karabakh Armenians were mentioned. I think that indeed we need to involve and to invite people who were affected directly, who suffered from the conflict directly. And I mean here Karabakh Armenians and displaced Azerbaijani people. So they should be also invited and also taking part more actively in peace building projects in the South Caucasus. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Philip, Sevil, and you already touched upon very important issues and concrete suggestions. First of all, continue what Philip mentioned about this humanitarian crises which are unfolding in the region because of the conflict issues, unresolved conflicts, and ongoing wars even. So I think this is, again, it's important to underline that peace building should be in close linkage with the development and humanitarian aid. The triple nexus, which has been in the UN agenda for quite a while, has not been, in fact, effectively implemented, especially in the post-Soviet space or in the South Caucasus particularly, but also Ukraine, Moldova, and other countries in the region. So I think this is the time when we need to reconsider that peace building is not only about NGOs speaking about peace and creating platforms for dialogues. This is also about the work on the site, on the ground, with people directly affected by the wars, by the conflicts, by trauma. And I think was it our previous webinar devoted to psychosocial peace building, and the article that Marina Danayan and Namik have presented and have written. I think this is one of those first steps of reconceptualization of peace work, of reconceptualization of peace building as such in the region. So also to consider humanitarian aspects and psychological aspects of people who are suffering because of the war. And yes, so this is one point. And another point is what also Philippe and Sevil mentioned, this giving voices, providing platforms for the voices of those people who are now standing on the position of anti-war because of the war in Ukraine and this invasion. So this is absolutely important, exactly. But as Phil mentioned, first of all, there is always the a danger that without providing certain platforms, these voices will be disappeared. So networking is important. So providing a possibility for these people to network across different countries, especially as you both mentioned, people from Russia who used to be in a position and now have taken the discourses against the war, the discourses for peace. It's important also to consider them and include them in this networking. And they are not residing also and migrating only to the South Caucasus and the post-Soviet space, but also in Europe and across the continent and even over the ocean. So it's important to bring these voices together, create platforms for them for this networking, and taking into account also those people from Belarus. But there are also other voices in these countries, in Europe, and there is a tradition, speaking about Finland, particularly a tradition of peace activism and those experiences which have preserved from the period of the Cold War time and those peace activism of that time. So some traditions have still been preserved here, and it's important to learn also from their practices and include many people from different countries in Europe to these networking processes. Yes, but these are not only those people who have certain exclusive power speaking about peace and constructing anti-war discourses. People in their everyday lives, those people who had no opportunity, for example, to leave the country in case of situation in Russia, or people who are living their daily lives in borderlands of Armenia and Azerbaijan, they possess very important knowledge of how to deal with the conflicts, how to deal with the trauma, how to deal with the constant issues of insecurity, and also they have an experience of peaceful interaction, experiences of peaceful coexistence from the past. And it's very much important also to take their experiences into account, so provide also possibilities for their voices to be heard in these networks, and even maybe include people from the region. So not let's forget about dialogic platforms of experts. This is a very exclusivist, elitist approach to talk about peace and to talk about how to deal with the conflicts and violence. The people on the ground in their daily life, they also has a very important knowledge that should be taken into account. So to support this microdynamics of peace is very important too. And yeah, and in addition to this, yes, not to forget about peace research that and the ethnographic methods that should be developed, and because they would have a better access to this local knowledge and provide opportunity to, and of course, peace journalism working also on the ground. And another third important aspect of peace work, peace activities is, of course, peace education. There is a clear lack in the region, especially the South Caucasus, of real peace education. There are some trainings, there are some activities of including Imagine work and other organizations working at providing some trainings on this, but there is no peace education integrated into curriculum of schools, of institutions. So there is a need also for creating peace education to integrate this into curriculum, into the education at different levels, and certain knowledge that exists in Europe can be provided as a way to not to establish the same and colonize peace education there, but at least to have certain exchanges and provided rather funding or platforms for this and possibilities for this. establishing of peace education and peace research institutes as well across the region. And for some reason, we quite often forget about Moldova, speaking about Ukraine and the South Caucasus, but of course, Moldova should be also taken into consideration on all these current affairs. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your reflections and recommendations. We have many comments and questions both in the Q&A and the chat separately, so I'm trying to navigate through both. But I have a request to you, Phil, Sev, and Vadim. If you could, and I saw that you have already replied to certain questions in the chat. So if you could do that, we could maybe cover more questions. So. Yeah, we could kind of basically cover both and then also address questions in the Q&A, which we prioritize at this moment. So from the very beginning, Pamela Steiner, you raised your hand, and I also saw your comment in the Q&A. So let me try to... so now I can allow you to talk. Now you can unmute yourself. And please let me know, would you like to turn on your camera as well?
Sure. I look a wreck, but that's okay.
Now I think you will be able to turn on your camera. Mm-hmm.
Hi, Phil. So this was you want me to ask my question now or my comment?
Yes, if you could,
Okay, first let me say I thought it was just a wonderful hour of such pointed, focused comments. And Sevil, I'm so sorry I couldn't understand a great deal of what you said. The sound was not clear enough. But I really loved how it all came together, and the idea I think most strongly put forward by Vadim, and perhaps only by you, of an idea of expanding the current set of liberal issues that brings people together globally, really, a certain group, for conserving the planet, anti-war, pro-human and civil rights, democratic rights go with it, but bringing to that an attack for a change from the vested interests, capitalistic, if you like, big corporations running government decisions, such as in the arms industry, above all, I would say, but many others. And somehow, though criticism of those, I called it an attack, but I think we need an intellectual attack and a connecting of the dots of the control of those sectors of power in the world that in turn fund elections, fund politicians, and really have prevented the solution of all kinds of problems that we do have solutions for far ahead of anything we're doing in all of these areas: peace building, environmental preservation, and so on. There are plenty of solutions. And it's, to my mind, about the process. And connected with that, Vadim's idea, I think, or maybe it's what I see coming out of it, and I've thought about it already, bringing together all these different young people who really see what's going on and want to change, doing the peace building work within the movement that is going to develop within that movement. Otherwise, they're going to break up into factions because they're different as well, and they will lose sight of, and so that's a whole huge piece of work, the kind of work that I know Phil knows and I know well as a trauma psychologist, how to, bring people together for that. So thank you. I'm sorry I took so much time. Thank you again for a spectacularly good hour.
Thank you too. Thank you. Well, Nona, you also raised your hand at the very beginning. Could you let us know if you still would like to join the conversation? I saw that you also submitted questions, so we could maybe address them. Yeah, please just let us know in the chat. Well, but meanwhile, I'll wait for a response from Nona. There are several comments from Onik in our Q&A, and I really like that how during this webinar we are receiving some proposals or recommendations, for some actions. And for example, Onik mentioned the experience with One Caucasus Festival and many other cultural events that happened during in the past during these years. And yeah, the question is that well, it sounds simplistic. I think it doesn't. But could it not be possible to organize Caucasus Edition or imagine meetings around those events, for example, such as One Caucasus Festival, and have kind of that discussions, and then enjoy the contemporary cross-cultural events in the evening? Yeah, maybe to rephrase it, what do you think about this kind of cultural events? And I personally believe that they are critically important, and recently I think we don't have many. Yeah.
Actually, I've been really dreaming recently. I think it happened.
We can't hear you, Vadim. Can you turn on your microphone? I think something is wrong with your microphone.
Yeah, sorry, I forgot to put it down. Yeah, I believe that yeah, since as I remember, since the Second Karabakh War, and when I encountered this horrible nationalistic songs coming from both sides, and when at the same time I managed to find, with the help of some of my colleagues, songs from Armenia and Azerbaijan with clear, very human, anti-war, pro-peace songs that still they're very small scale but are produced in these countries. I realized how important to bring these artists together in the format of One Caucasus Festival, but also to provide a platform and organize a festival bigger than that, including also people from different countries. That's a good point, because yeah, we forgot to mention this artists and cultural figures. We consider them, of course, mostly as part of activism, of course, but they have been a tradition of anti-war songs, even in the yeah, there is even some kind of I don't know how well you are familiar with the music landscape in Russia, but in the rock space, but there are some groups which are promoting wars, nationalistic discourses, but at the same time, on the other side, there are groups who are promoting peace and anti-war discourses. And for some reason, these kind of activities have been forgotten, like organizing as it used to be even during the Cold War period, especially towards the end of that period. There were festivals that were bringing from both camps groups to sing anti-war songs, anti-nuclear war songs, and all this. Like, why not to revive this idea? That would be wonderful, of course. I'm focusing at least on the post-Soviet space, or maybe the South Caucasus at least. That would be great, absolutely. And yeah, that would also support all these artists and make them known. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Nona, I'm promoting you right now, so you can turn on your.
I've seen the question. I'm happy to answer if I'm assuming.
Okay, yeah, maybe you can.
She's here.
Mm-hmm. Hi.
Hi. Thank you for this great event, and thank you for giving us ideas. And I'm absolutely not critical. I just want to say that it is, to me, being now in Yerevan and traveling to Karabakh frequently, is just impossible to speak about peacemaking or peace building or peace, I don't know, peace stuff in a current situation, just because, we can speak about peace capacity, maybe, just because there is no trust, there is zero trust between sides. And I follow very, very, how to say, meticulously some of new peace groups in Facebook, like Перекресток, and I see that, you know, it's full of double standards, and you know, to me, the problem is that, you know, we just ignore some social realities, which means that we still can see, and this is absolutely kind of, you know, obvious, that there is genocidal, if you don't like that word, just suggest another word, genocidal intentions of Azerbaijan toward the citizens of Nagorno-Karabakh. And, you know, and they call them Azerbaijani citizens, but at the same time, they invite them, quote unquote, to leave the region. So in this context, I don't know, you know, just building trust or first bricks of trust is maybe relevant to speak about. Otherwise, I will not forget to repeat and reiterate that Azerbaijan is, as a country, as a people, I don't know, they are not possible, neither to defeat nor to win. In both situations, they really act terrible, you know, and this, why I'm telling about double standards. My question is usually, okay, I'm for peace. I'm here because I really want peace without avoiding difficult questions. But please answer me one question. Would you be fighting and speaking about peace on 26 or 25 of September 2020? And the answer is always no, never. You have to be, we have to be hegemonic. So my question to you or comment is, would you imagine this anti-utopic scenario that Nagorno-Karabakh is kind of sharing power? We actually had that back in 2020, back in 1918, sharing power in Shushi. After that sharing of power, Armenian neighborhood of Shushi stopped its existence via massacres and via ethnic cleansing. So partition is only possible, kind of possible, scenario of this new status quo or new situation, but this is not acceptable for Azerbaijan. So I think, and also I'm always like, you know, I would be laughing, if not crying, when Azerbaijani peacekeepers, peacemakers speak about Ukrainian-Russian situation as if Ukraine would be Azerbaijan and Russia is Armenia. That's ridiculous to me because it's completely vice versa. And actually, what really struck me terribly, that Aliyev Jr., this terrible dictator and corruptioner, is now popular even in Armenia. So strong man culture is becoming stronger. I'm sorry for this tautology, and this is not even long-term, you know, consequence of this terrible war. It's just beginning, and I'm waiting for more terrible things. So I think, please, if it is possible, be realistic speaking about peace and give us any formula that can be possible to fulfill, to implement.
Thank you, Nona. Just to give a voice to other people, I think you are raising important questions, and we will try to address them right now. And I really understand that it is also hard for us too when there are tensions, and especially during the war, to keep thinking and reconceptualizing the work we do and peace. But well, if not during that times, when else it is essential to discuss and try to find answers to that question. So please feel, Vadim, if you would like to address that issue.
Okay. So thank you for the questions. There's a lot that I heard, so I cannot cover everything. So on a couple of points, do we have answers to what the solutions are? Certainly not. That's why, if anything, we feel that last 10, 20 years, we've been working in a direction that's doesn't seem to be particularly relevant, or at least needs to be completely reconceptualized. That's why this conversation. Were there peace voices during the war on September 27, 28, coming out of Azerbaijan? Yes. They were not loud, and neither they were from Armenia, right? So actually, I took a challenge of counting individuals who spoke against the war, and I couldn't get past like the 10. And then at some point got a bit more, but it was very, very small number. And I'm talking both about Armenia and Azerbaijan. I really, really trust hard looking for these people. So that discourse didn't exist. When we were winning the war in Armenia, it was very popular. So now Armenia and Karabakh lost the war. But then the time during the war, the discourse of violence was very prominent in Armenia too. Very few people were speaking anti-war. Same was happening in Azerbaijan without anyhow justifying that. And there was a very strong prevalence of pro-war sentiments, very few people speaking anti-war. Having said that, there were anti-war voices in both societies. They became louder, particularly recently in Armenia. Interestingly, because unfortunately, the government space seems important. The government opened the space for pro kind of peace discourse. However awkward, they are doing it themselves, and that suddenly allowed to question kind of this war paradigm in Armenia. So in Azerbaijan, seeing as in I cannot follow as closely, let's say, as Armenia, given my language. I don't speak Azerbaijani, but privately I do know a lot of Azerbaijanis who are very actively anti-war. So that leads to this question: where are these voices, right? Why are we hearing only pro-war sentiments? And this is where the issue of platforms come, because the voices are there. They have been continually marginalized. They have been, and again, I'm talking about Armenia as well, myself having seen the difficulties of voicing anything anti-war year after year after year. Right? So the voices are there. In private conversations, they come out. Some people stand out and put themselves at risk and speak out and write petitions. The real anti-war sentiment, I believe, is much stronger, even anecdotally, but hundreds and hundreds of private conversations. Is there a platform? Is there a space for public discussion about this? Very rarely, basically no. What we are seeing in Russia now, right? So all the anti-war voices have to be arrested or leave the country. So that has been happening for 30 years in Azerbaijan as well. So the voices are there, the platforms are not. So for me, this is where the real future comes, where we need to start creating these platforms in whatever form and shape, and if not in countries, then outside of them. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Ellen, I saw that you raised a hand. Could you also please type in the question in the Q&A if you still want to join, just in one sentence? And
sorry, Christina, I just add
the
answer to Nono. As a team, as a Caucasus Edition, we're always trying to avoid such strong terms concerning the modern Karabakh conflict as genocide. I'm not talking about the genocide 1915. Yeah, we never, me personally, never call Ardan, which was left from Ardan genocide, the act of genocide. And this is what actually how we are working. We should not to attack each other or to have these mutual grievances. We should talk about what we can do mutually toward peace. This is the problem when in the conflicts, it's always like one side is right and another one is not right. Yeah, but it's not like this. Yeah, we know this. That's why we're trying to address all the problems which are now going on in our region, but at the same time, we should respect each other and avoid such strong terms. Thank you.
Thank you. There is another question, and one second. Well, it was concerning the terminology of. So the term anti-war often has negative connotations within societies and is also largely associated with actively political left. So there's a possibility that it will be seen as such a limit for involvement. Isn't pro-peace better, or even a different, less contentious term entirely? What do you think about the terminology that?
Yeah, can I just very briefly? I think that I don't see any negative connotations in leftist movement, but I think this is the next attempt to marginalize anti-war movement, saying that they are only leftist. Yeah, and I think that it doesn't matter how we call it, anti-war or pro-peace. Yeah, we shouldn't divide these people. We shouldn't divide this movement. We should unite them, yeah, to try to find something mutual and working together toward peace. It's my opinion.
If I can add, the anti-war and pro-peace has been intentionally marginalized not only in our region. Yes, it's absolutely is marginalized in Armenia, Azerbaijan, and increasingly now, right, the Ukraine. And so on. But it's been also the case in the US. So the word peace itself has been really, so a lot of institutions been running away from the word peace. Just thinking it's either associated with the peace movement, anti-war, anti-Vietnam movement, a lot of different leftist causes, and so on. So it's been really this marginalization of the word peace happening again all over the world. And that on its own is a problem. So I think there are two steps here in a way. Tactically, maybe, right? So there is some initiative, some people who just feel like they don't, or they're not leftist, they don't want to be associated with whatever they think is a leftist cause. Sure, there should be a space created for, other terms to be used. Just I don't want to die, right? Or I just don't think it's good for my country. Sure, all of this can be used in a shorter term. In the longer term, I think there is absolutely critical to start legitimizing, essentially working on the changing of the perception of the word, the term peace. And yes, anti-war. So how is war suddenly more, right? The killing of scores of people. Somehow that's more acceptable term, and that we need to be pro-war. We need to be supportive of essentially killing and murder, mass murder, and yet we shouldn't be, it should be not popular or not acceptable to talk about essentially absence of violence. So that on its own, right, it's quite absurd if we just name it, and yet that's where we are. So yes, there is absolutely a lot of intentional work has to be done to legitimize or reclaim the term peace.
Thank you. We have more questions, and I really apologize that we can't address all of them because it's only 5 minutes left, and we really want to stick to time and not to take more time from your evening. But in order to conclude our discussion, Phil, Vadim, Sev, I really want to go back to one of the things mentioned by Nona, because I think it's a very common and sometimes legitimate maybe criticism that the anti-war movements and anti-war voices might be detached from the reality, while there are major insecurities and there are certain voices or discourses about coexistence, that it seems like these two can't anyhow be, together and are irrelevant. So and personally, I believe that it is a stereotype that anti-war discourses are limited only to that kind of romanticizing, which is, of course, I believe that anyone in our region wants to see that kind of peaceful region, but it's really not limited to that. And I would really want to ask you, in order to conclude, to maybe reiterate or address one more time the issue of immediate steps and why kind of what else is part of anti-war discourse that we're discussing. If we could kind of deconstruct it and make it more specific, what do we mean by that? I think that would be important.
Yeah. Yeah, I will not address much the previous question, but exactly continue from what Christina mentioned. Yeah, of course, if we will think about the tradition of peace movement and to the political spectrum of this movement, it's not really helpful at the moment. As well as the defining peace, what exactly peace means in terms of the notion, term, or like concept as such. So, because of course, then it will be very much value-loaded concept on which many would disagree. So yeah, the question is now mostly about these anti-war feelings that is obviously now present in the region as ever before. Of course, I'm also maybe essentializing, being affected by this ongoing war in Ukraine more than people who were affected, of course, during the Karabakh war and all this. Of course, it's understandable. But in terms of at least media campaign, how anti-war discourses are mediatized across countries in the region, in the post-Soviet space, in Europe, globally. Of course, we also should not we should understand that what is happening now in Ukraine, and we'll speak about as a global effect of this. It's very Eurocentric approach, of course. So for many people in the world, other wars are more relevant than the war in Ukraine. But in general, because of the let's say the monopoly of certain media corporations in this world, they could not ignore the anti-war discourses happening in Europe at the moment, like rising in Russia, in the post-Soviet region, in Europe, in US, in other countries. So there is a clear visualization, mediatization of the anti-war discourses, as at least I have never observed before. And there are also people who are active in producing these anti-war discourses. I'm not speaking about now peace movement, but like anti-war discourses. At least bringing these people, at least bringing together this those who produce these anti-war discourses and act against the war in their localities, in their organizations, in their countries, in wherever they are, bringing them together at the moment when there is still this an acute issue and a lot of people are concerned about. And after that, we would need to, of course, at some point think about what peace should be for the region, for the concrete situation, for the globe, and these are another type of discussions which are, of course, better not maybe to conduct at the moment. But at least bringing these people together on anti-war stances at the moment is important. And then, of course, other type of discussions should be launched, but already when the war itself will be stopped or become less acute.
Thank you. Phil?
Yeah, I don't think we have the luxury of waiting for this war to stop, because it might not for a few years, and by the time it's over, hopefully suddenly we see some kind of light bulb come up and people stop fighting, but that doesn't seem to be realistic in my point of view in any sense. By the time it's over, there will be too much destruction. So I do think, unfortunately, we have to start thinking as the war rages and probably expands. A few points. Yes, first of all, I agree with the comment that you have two different things at the same time. One, we have a reification of the war. So that for a couple of centuries now, you really glorified war in everything, from official to textbooks to commemorations done officially to folk songs and what else. So there's been really a fetishization, reification of war. So war is glorious. Peace is somehow something to be ashamed of. So we have this. Then you may have this kind of, what compounds this is that the peace discourse has been promoted really by language that's been quite disconnected from reality a lot of times. I also accept this problem. So I think these two things together, and that hasn't been promoted the way through state machines and propaganda the way war has been. So even though I think that war discourse is just as artificial as the peace discourse we have, the promotion, the PR didn't match, let's say. What we have, so that both of them are problematic essentially. You have very well promoted war discourse, and you have very kind of marginalized and under promoted and somewhat superficial peace discourse. But we do have, I think, expanding this idea of peace is really then becomes important, and I will start, more and more accepting what Vadim is saying. One of the politicians in Armenia I was recently talking to saying that there is actually, when you go to the regions, there is no pro-war sentiment. The closer to the border you get, the more peace people want, even though they might not be using it in technocratic peace discourse language, right? And that's been actually confirmed from case to case, country to country, where people actually affected by war are very much a lot of times anti-war. This includes soldiers, this includes a lot of people who are, right, actually see and know what war is. Not this glorified kind of textbook image of that, but the real consequences of that. So what's that language, right? So yes, we need to build, I think that saying ground up, we also even turn that into some kind of a technocratic term, but really, really listening to what's happening and trying to use that language, build on that language becomes important, because peace is much more popular, at least in working on the ground as an ethnographer. I can see there's very little pro-war sentiments outside of a few propaganda circles in real life, but that voice is absolutely not channeled, it's absolutely not heard. Thank you.
Thank you. We're really out of time, but Sev, do you have anything to add, and then we'll conclude?
Very shortly. I just wanted to ask that we need to stop treating our conflict as something exclusional. If we, for instance, if we look or think about the consequences of the World War II, it was a moment after World War II that many just must have sat back and think that after all such horror and violence, it would be impossible to change anything. But for some people, it was a reason and motivation to change the world. This violence, genocide, and all the consequences of the war, and they did, and they succeeded. And we see the Western Europe for 80 years, almost 80 years without wars. So this is possible, and I think that the peace building, it's a very long-lasting process. It was also not simple and very immediate and quick after the World War II. So we still need time to work toward peace in our region.
Thank you very much. I want to thank my colleagues, but also more importantly our audience for your active participation and your feedback and your criticism, which is of course was also one of the goals for us. This was a kind of reflective process that we engage on daily basis as a team, and we really appreciate it for you being with us today and joining this conversation. The recording of this webinar will be saved and will be on our YouTube channel as the rest of our webinars, and please follow us to get to know about our upcoming webinars, and we'll certainly we plan to have one more on this topic. Thank you very much and goodbye.